A good old-fashioned holistic cancer survivor and thriver story coming to you very shortly. When our son Ryder was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 11 days before his first birthday, my wife Teddy and I knew we weren't going to leave anything that could get him well on the table. We've worked with countless doctors and health experts, moved away from our family and friends, raised and spent tens of thousands of dollars, even built a non-toxic house in the middle of the woods. All in the name of healing. Today, Ryder is happy and healthy, and we live more fulfilling lives than before the diagnosis. This is a revolution against what causes cancer and disease, and against what people think about how to reverse it. Whether you're actively healing and want to know all your options, keeping it behind you, or making sure cancer never touches your family, this is your revolution. This is the anti-cancer revolution. From integrative to alternative to energetic, we walk down all paths of wellness, free of bias. My name is Ryan Sternagel. Enjoy the journey. Very excited to bring you this interview with James Templeton, who overcame a very rough stage 4 melanoma diagnosis with a surprisingly simple protocol, which you'll hear all about in the interview. I really enjoyed that aspect of the interview, along with the emphasis on mindset. A lot of times you'll hear the most importance of mindset type information from new agey type folks that sound great but you can't quite relate to. Not from a Texan good old boy, as you're about to hear now, so look forward to that. James also happens to be married to the legendary longtime health author Anne Louise Gittleman, who he met along the way in his healing journey. Funny where these things take you sometimes, isn't it? Aside from the good old, please don't take anything you hear on this show or read on our website to replace medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Consult your doctor, or even better, a wide variety of them from varying disciplines. Disclaimer, that's all I've got for you right now, and I will see you back here on the other side. Welcome back to the Anti-Cancer Revolution, and on today's interview we have with us James Templeton. James, how are you, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Ryan. It's great to be with you today.
It's great to be with you on this sunny California Golden Gate Bridge Day or rugged Western ranch day, depending on whose screen you're looking at if you're watching this on YouTube. I was for everybody listening, I was going to try out a green screen because I have I wouldn't call it ugly, but it's a boring whiteboard behind me, and I've been getting tired of it. So I pulled out this green screen in the last few minutes, but then I only had 3 options, one of which was this Golden Gate Bridge, but then James sat down in front of this lovely painting, so I figured I had to match him. James, you've got an amazing story on reversing stage 4 melanoma with a whole bunch of stuff, and we'll get into. I always like to ask first on these survivor stories, were you holistically or naturally, or whatever you want to call this whole world, inclined before the diagnosis, or is that something you found along the way?
Not at all. Before this happened to me, I didn't know anything about anything. And when I got sick, or if I did get sick, I'd go straight to the doctor, and just conventional medicine, that was all I knew. I'd never really had any health problems. So no, I wasn't alternatively minded. I just was a regular guy living in Texas and a hardworking guy. But other than that, I was just like a straight-laced guy.
Good deal. Well, I suppose tell us about it. What were the signs kind of leading up to getting diagnosed and all that? And anything else you want to mention about, leading up to your story,
sure.
Before then, go for it.
Sure. Well, Ryan, I was living in Texas, and I was a young guy. It was back in 1985, and I thought everything was going great. I thought I had life by the tail, I guess you could say. I was married. I had a beautiful wife. I had a young daughter. It wasn't even 2 years old. I had several very successful small businesses that were doing very well for me, and I had developed this ambition, and I was doing very well with the business, and I was exercising a lot. I was one of these guys that was running all the time. You'd see me running down the highway, And I lived out on a farm, and it was out 10 miles from town. And I would run to town and back. I would run just all over the place. People would see me and they'd say, "There goes that guy running. Boy, he runs a lot." So I was running 60 miles a week on the average probably. And I was working out in the gym and everything. And you want to know why I was doing this? Well, the reason is because I thought that it would help me, of course, stay in shape and all that. But my father and my grandfather both died of heart disease at a very young age. My grandfather, I never knew my grandfather. He died at the age of 36. My father at the age of 46.
Wow.
And I just, after my father died, I was in high school as a senior in high school. And I didn't know what I was going to do after that, because I loved my father very much. My father was just the kind of, I looked up to him, and just like most boys do in high school, and hopefully they do. And when he died, I just thought my life was over with, kind of, and I went through a lot of depression and all that. So it really affected me a lot, but I didn't want to be the next guy to end up like that. And in my book, I talk about some of the things that led up to all this, happening. But my mother died before I was 2 years old. And I had a brother
Really?
that died. I had a brother that died before I was, when he was 8. So I was going to say before I got out of high school. So I had a lot of death in my family. And I guess I started to think maybe, and I looked back at this later on, that maybe I was thinking I was going to be next. And I didn't want to be next, really, but I thought that, that was just going to be my destiny. But I got into this running thing to try to slow down this death thing, and slow down the idea that maybe I was going to drop over with a heart attack, and while I was running or whatever, because I was into this guy back then that was a kind of a guru in the health in the fitness industry. His name was Jim Fixx. And Jim Fixx was a runner. He was a guy that his father died at the age of 35. And he got into running because he thought it would save him from heart disease. Because, most of the time we think, well, it's in my family, I'm probably going to have issues with heart disease. So he got into running, and he felt like he could run and exercise and work out and eat anything he wanted to, pretty much. So I got to following him and thinking that he had all the keys to good health. So I followed him and read his books and all that. And one day I went to the office at one of my businesses one morning. I sat down, I grabbed a cup of coffee, grabbed a newspaper, sat down, and started to read that newspaper. And the first thing I noticed, was just about knocked me out of my chair, because it said, Jim Fixx, running guru, dies of heart attack while running. Wow. And I about fell out of my chair. I mean, I think my coffee, got cold, because I was in so much shock that I didn't know what to do after that. And I'm thinking, man, here I am doing all this, thinking I'm doing the right thing, and he drops over, dead with a heart attack. I better figure out really what I'm doing. Maybe I'm not doing the right thing after all. So I decided to go to one of these doctors specialized in these cardio stress tests. These stress tests where they put you on a treadmill and see exactly how good a shape your heart is in. So I thought, well, I need to do that. So I went into this office. The doctor put me on the treadmill, and he did a thorough, examination, and said, everything looks so good so far. He got me on the treadmill, and he said to me, "Oh my goodness," he says, "you're in great, tremendous shape." He said, "What in the world do you do?" And he said, "You broke the record." He said, "You have broke the record in my office. Nobody's ever done this well." He said, "You just are the picture of health. Keep doing what you're doing." He says, just whatever it is, you keep doing it. And on the way out of the office, he looked at me and he says, "There's only one thing I could find wrong with you. You're in great health. You're going to live a long time. But there's only one thing that I see that you might want to even look into a little bit. And he says, there's a mole on your back. And he says, that mole looks a little different than the other moles. He said, it just looks a little strange. It's probably nothing to it, but he says, if I was you, I'd just get it checked out when you get a chance at a dermatologist's office. Well, I didn't think much about it, and because he didn't make a big deal out of it. And I don't know, a few weeks later, I decided, well, maybe I should go get that mole checked out. And it was on my back. I couldn't even hardly see it. You know, it's one of those places where you can't see it. So I went into this dermatologist's office. He says, well, take your shirt off. He says, what seems to be the problem? You know, and because he knew something on my back, he says, let me take a look. And he looks on my back and he says, well, he says, oh my goodness. He goes, I think you might have melanoma, just like that.
That quick?
That quick. He says, I think you have melanoma. And the guy just started getting all excited. He started acting like, you know, this guy that had seen something that got him really giddy. You know, he acted like he won the lottery or something. I've never had a doctor act like that. I mean, he was like running around saying, oh my goodness, I think it is melanoma. He says, we might have to remove a large area of your tissue on your back. He says, and he said, this is serious business here. He says, you know, you could die from this, just like that. And here I go in there thinking everything's fine. 5 minutes later, I'm getting all this. And it scared the living daylights out of me. And I tell you what, I didn't like his bedside manner. And I said to him, well, I'm going to go home and think about this and I'll get back to you. Because he scared me so bad with his bedside manner. And I went home, and my wife says, you know, well, you know, I told her what happened, and she says, well, I think you should get a second opinion. And I said, you know, that's a good idea, because I don't know how I made it home. I was shaking in my boots, and, you know, I was just a wreck. And I got home, and after talking to her, we decided to get that second opinion. I went and got a second opinion. The dermatologist that I went to, that's a guy I had been to before in the past, he looked at it and he says, well, it looks a little suspicious to me too. But he says, you know, it's probably nothing. And if it is, it's probably an early stage. And he says, I'm not too concerned about it. But he says, just to be safe, I want to send you over to a specialist that would really know. And he is an oncologist. And he says, this guy is world renowned. He's a friend of mine. I think I can get you in to see him real quick here. And he said, this is the guy, if you have to go to someone, this is the guy to go to. So I thought, well, this is good. You know, I'm going to one of the best. So within a day or two, we had an appointment. So I go in to see this guy, and he looks at it and he goes, well, it looks suspicious to me also. And he looks at it and he says, but you know, the only way we're going to really know is we need to get this thing out of there and remove it and see exactly what it is. So what did he do? He says, let's do it right here in the office. He says, why don't you lay down over here on this table? He says, I'll just take it out right now. We'll send it into the lab.
Man.
And so he did. He went in, he took a big old plug, probably a 2-inch square plug out of my back. And it was a big plug, and he sewed me up, and he says, there's nothing else we can do right now but send it in and see what the results say. He says, I'll call you in a few days. He said, go home, don't worry. Well, all I did was go home and worry. I mean, who's not going to worry? Yeah. Here I was, a 32-year-old guy that thought that I had everything going great for me. Now I'm worrying about, you know, this biopsy of this tissue on my back that might be melanoma, and I didn't know what else to do but sit around and mope, and I couldn't sleep, and I walked in, you know, circles and was on pins and needles. Well, it was nearly 2 weeks before the doctor calls me, and after 2 weeks, I couldn't believe how long it'd been.
2 weeks?
I thought it was going to be like a couple of days, and no, it was like that. And the doctor calls me on the phone. I remember answering the phone at home. He goes, this is Dr. So-and-so. He says, I have to tell you, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news for you. And I'm like, oh my gosh, one of those kind of deals. Well, anytime somebody says bad news, you know, along with good news, it doesn't sound too good. And he went on to tell me, he says, the good news is that you have melanoma. And I'm like, good news? How could that be good news? He goes, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. He goes, we think we got it all. He said, around that perimeter area, there's no signs of any melanoma. And he says, I think that we got it all from this incision. He says, that's the good news. And he says, but the bad news is that it was very deep. And he said the melanoma was very deep. And he says, we measure that on something called the Clark scale of measurement. And he says, being that it's so deep, it's going to be stage 4. And he says, that's not a good thing, because stage 4 cancer, and just about any kind of cancer, is going to spread, and it's most likely going to end up somewhere else in the body, whether it's in your an organ or your lymph nodes. And so we have to really take a really close look at this and stay on top of it, because, you know, this is serious. Well, after that, he says there's nothing to do but just try to live your normal lifestyle. Don't worry. He says, come in every 3 months. We'll check you out and try to stay on top of things. He says, hopefully, we'll never see this again. And just like that, he says, you know, don't worry. So what did I do? Before I was worrying, now I'm really worrying. And here I was, this young guy that was ambitious, that couldn't wait to go to work every day, and wanted to run every day and exercise and be very active just in life in general. I didn't want to do anything after that. I didn't want to go to work. I didn't want to run anymore. I didn't want to, you know, I just felt sorry for myself. So I sat around and I moped and I moped. And I wasn't the same happy-go-lucky guy. And my wife was getting tired of it after a while, because this went on and on. And I started to read a little bit. We didn't have the internet, but I read everything I could. I didn't want to, because it was scary. It scared the heck out of me. But I read and I found out a little bit about melanoma, especially stage 4. And I found out from an old doctor friend of mine that people with stage 4 melanoma usually don't live over 3 years. And I'm like, oh, God, how could this be happening to me? So I just was not a happy camper, of course. Who would be? And before I knew it, I went to get checked out. Everything checked out fine. But, you know, the doctor says we just got to keep looking at things. And so I still was very stressed out. But before I knew it, my marriage came to an end. My wife said she couldn't really deal with it. And I basically left town, went to town, moved into town, and took my daughter with her. And, you know, just after that, I didn't care if I lived or died. Believe me, it was such a shock to me that she had, you know, I guess it was too much for her, and I wasn't fun to be around. I wasn't a nice guy anymore, and I was just this nervous wreck. And, you know, I guess I couldn't blame her, because, you know, it wasn't a good time for us. But before I knew it, that was the end of my marriage pretty much. And everything had been checked out, and I went back again to see the doctor. Everything checked out again. And but before I knew it, I was taking a shower, and I found a lump in my groin. And it was like in my right groin, and it was like a marble, you know, wow, swollen up. And I called the doctor up, and he says, well, he says, probably nothing, but why don't you come in and let's check it out. So I did. I went in. He looked at it, and he goes, well, you know, it's probably, you might have bumped into something. Or he said, let's don't worry about it. He said, go on home. Don't worry. He says, well, we'll look at it in, you know, in a couple of months when it's your time to come in.
What is it with doctors and don't worry?
I know. I mean, that's
let's
what they
just
always
check it
say,
out
you
later.
know?
Yeah, it's like
That's what they say.
My son had a massive lump sticking out of his back right next to his spine, and they told us to come back in 6 weeks.
I know. It's
We
like,
didn't,
oh,
for the
well,
record.
it's
It's like,
swollen. It's like, yeah, don't worry. And I know. So I go back in and he says that, and I go home, and boy, it started getting bigger and bigger. And I went back to him immediately, and I said, this thing is getting bigger. He goes, well, he says, I think that we need to go and see what this is. So right then, I didn't know what he was going to do, but he says, let's check you in the hospital first thing in the morning. And he goes in, he says, hopefully it won't be anything, and we'll just be a small incision. But when I woke up in that operating room or in that recovery room, I knew I was in trouble because it wasn't some little incision. It was all these bandages, and I knew that wasn't good. And before I knew it, the doctor walks in the room, and he says to me, he says, well, James, he says, I'm sorry to tell you that of this news that the cancer has spread and it's in your lymphatic system. And he says, that is something I was afraid of. And he says, this isn't good. And he says, we really got to get aggressive with this. And he says, there's only one thing I know to do. And he says, that is experimental chemotherapy. And he says, we're going to give you 80 treatments of experimental chemotherapy.
like
And he
80
says,
separate infusions?
yeah, well, what they did was they would elevate my temperature as high as they could to get, the temperature up to 105 or somewhere around there or more, without, as high as they could without it killing me, basically, to stimulate the immunity. And then they would induce the chemotherapy in an IV after that. So it was about an 8 to 10 hour each day process, but they would do 5 treatments and then come back every 2 months and do 5 more.
Gotcha.
So it was because it really made you sick. And they would do this typhoid serum, to elevate your temperature. Took about an hour. Then they'd lay these blankets on you that were like weighted blankets because you were just like, just freezing to death when your temperature is that high.
That's interesting. I hear alternative, holistic clinics doing hyperthermia in combination with IV curcumin or something, but I've never heard of them using that in just a conventional setting.
Well, that's what they did back then, and I tell you, that was the worst stuff I've ever done. But he also said, since we removed all your lymph nodes in your groin, you got to use a lymph drainage pump. And he says, you got to use that several hours a day, because if you don't, you could lose your leg. And boy, he went into all that. So here I am, in there after this. I got to do the chemo, got to do the lymph drainage pump. And then he says to me, he didn't want to
didn't just tell you to get on a rebounder or something like that, huh?
No, because my leg was swollen.
Yeah.
Twice the size of the other one. He says right then, he says, well, I hate to tell you, he didn't want to tell me, and I got it out of him. I said, what are my chances with all this? What am I looking at here? And he goes, well, he says, to be honest with you, I think you have about a 20% chance of surviving 3 to 5 years. He says, that is if we can get you through the chemotherapy. He says, if you don't do the chemotherapy, he says, I don't know anything else to do. And he says, I don't think there's much of a chance. He didn't tell me how long, but he acted like I'd be lucky if I saw the next year, just from his experience. And he told me that, and I was just like, my life's over. I don't know. I guess this is it. I guess I wasn't meant to be an older man. So I'm laying there, and I'm really desperate to find an answer. And I spent several days in the hospital feeling sorry for myself, just down, and I was drugged up from the pain from the surgery, and I felt hopeless. I felt like there was nothing I could do, and I just didn't know what to do. And like I said earlier, I didn't know anything about alternatives. So I'm laying there, and all of a sudden I get a phone call. And the phone call came, and I answered it, and it was a minister of mine that I went to church, not every week, but every once in a while I'd go to church and probably a couple times a month. And it was a minister of this church that I went to. And he was a nice guy, and he was a runner like me. He was older than me, but he was an professional baseball player, and really nice guy and all that, a tough guy. And he says to me, he says, James, he says, I heard about you. And he says, I've been praying for you. I want you to know that. He says, there's many people in town and at the church are praying for you also. So don't feel like you're, so many people rooting for you. And he says, I know that if anybody can beat this cancer, you can do it. He says to me, he says, I know you know how to push yourself. I know you're a runner, and you can, what you have to do when you need to do something. And he says to me, he says, I want you to beat this cancer. And he didn't say it like that. He said it in words like, I want you to beat this so-and-so cancer. And it got my attention because I never heard the guy talk like that. I felt like I was in a locker room at a football game and we were losing, at halftime, and the coach wasn't too happy and he was letting us have it. Well, this guy started to let me have it a little bit and told me, he says, you're going to beat this SOB cancer is what he said. And it really got me. And I said, he's right. I can't give in to this. I can't sit around and feel sorry for myself. There's got to be something I can do. I got to find it. It's got to find it. So what did I do? I started to pray. And not with him, by myself, but I prayed harder than I ever prayed in my life. And I wasn't a guy that prayed a lot. But I tell you what, Ryan, I prayed, and I felt like I was praying 100 times harder than I'd ever prayed. Every cell in my body was involved. I felt like it was almost like an out-of-body experience. And I guess it was out of desperation and with all that and the fear and everything else that was involved. But I prayed and I asked for help, and I tell you what, it was quite an experience. And probably 20 minutes later after that prayer, I got a knock on the hospital door. And here comes a friend of mine through that door that I hadn't seen in probably 7.5 years or so is what I remember. And he was an old buddy, and he had heard about me in the hospital. And he said, I felt so bad. I heard about you. He said, I was talking to a friend of mine at lunch yesterday at work, and he said he had heard about a guy that healed himself with cancer, with a diet and lifestyle. And he brought me these papers that I have in my hand here, and it's about that. It's a book review. And he says, I just thought that this might be something that could help you. So when he walked in the door telling me all this, I started to feel inside of me that this was what I was supposed to do. And I didn't have to ask too many questions. I just felt like, hey, this is from God, the higher power, whatever you want to say. My prayer has been answered. If this will work for this guy, why won't it work for me?
No, that's just to throw it in. I've kind of got goosebumps when you said that. When we were clicking around on the internet, just trying to find hope and survivor stories and so on and so forth, we locked onto a story by her name's Leanne Woodland. She was the mother of a small child that was diagnosed with cancer, so stage 4 neuroblastoma, same thing our son had, Ryder, and same kind of thing. They had been sent home by the hospital, nothing left we could do, and they prayed really hard, and they got a knock on the door, and it was from someone from church that had come across this prescription for nutritional healing book, and thought it might help, and that got him set on the way, and now the kid's I believe he's graduated from college now. Yeah.
Wow.
Crazy stuff.
How about that?
Yeah.
I talked to a young lady yesterday. The same thing happened to her, and she's doing well now. Had stage 4 melanoma like me, and she's doing well, and quite a few years now. And I talked to her, and same thing happened. So I hear this all the time. But when this guy gave me this news, I started to get excited. All of a sudden, I started to feel hope. I started to feel a difference in my body, a feeling of that belief, a feeling that if this guy could do it, why can't I do it? And it was a guy that healed himself using a macrobiotic diet and lifestyle. And I'd never heard of that, macrobiotics. What the heck is that macrobiotic diet? What is that? So the guy had written this book, and it was called Confessions of a Kamikaze Cowboy. And his name was Dirk Benedict. And there was a TV show on back in the 80s. And about that time, this guy had, I didn't even know he'd had cancer. But this guy was on this TV show called The A-Team back then. It was, there was three guys, as Mr. T, a lot of people remember him. And this guy was the younger guy, the blonde-headed guy in there. And I think they called him Face in there. And this was Dirk Benedict. Well, I got to reading about him, and I had my friend go out and get his book for me, and I couldn't put the book down because it was my first, bit of hope, and I wanted to read it. I was excited, and I could relate to this guy. This guy was a guy from Montana, grew up on a ranch, was a real cowboy when he was young. And I related to him because, I was from Texas, and I felt like, we're kind of similar on a certain level. And so I got very excited, and I felt like if Dirk can do it, I can do it. And I went to bed that night, drugs and all, the morphine and all, because that's what I was on because of all the pain and everything. And I went to bed with a lot of hope, a lot of excitement. And I woke up the next morning, and it was mid-morning, and I got another knock on the door. And my stepmother came through the door, and she's waving a book around, and she comes in the door, and she says, well, I just got this book from so-and-so today in the mail, and I brought it right over to you because she says it seems very interesting. It's about people that had cancer that were basically terminally ill, and they took high dose of vitamin C, and they lived for much longer periods of time, and a lot of them even got well. And the book is, it was Cancer and Vitamin C, and it was written by Linus Pauling.
I was going to ask if that was Linus Pauling's book, yeah.
I didn't even know Linus Pauling. So here, all of a sudden, I'm reading this book here about these people, and I got excited about this. And I said, okay, I got my diet, I got my lifestyle. Now I've got a supplement here. It's going to help me, because if it'll work for these guys, it's going to work for me too. Why not? I started to believe and really feel excitement. And I didn't feel that fear and depression. I felt like I had hope again. So the next day, I got another knock on the door in the hospital room. And here comes through the door, it's the hospital psychotherapist. And this hospital psychotherapist comes through the door, and he says to me, he says, I'm so-and-so. And he says, I heard you were very depressed. And he says, I would love to come and visit with you. Is that something that's possible? And I said, well, sure, you can come in and visit with me. And I said to him right off the bat, I said, I want to ask you a question here. Have you ever heard of a diet called Macrobiotic? And he says, hold on a second. He just takes off towards the door. And I thought he was leaving. I thought I said the bad word here. And I thought, why is he? I was at, the bed was a good ways from the door. He took off to the door, and he shut that door, and he came back in, he shut it tight. And he says to me, he says, yes, I have heard about the macrobiotic diet. As he sat down next to me, he says, but I'm not going to tell you everything I know unless you promise to not tell anybody about our conversation. He says, I don't want to lose my job, my pension, all that. I've been here 25 years or so. I don't want to lose all that. And then sure as the world, I'll lose everything if they know I'm talking to you about this. Well, I got very interested when he started to act like that. And he said to me, he says, by the way, you don't seem very depressed. He said, you seem like you're kind of, not the guy that I heard about. Because I'd been really down, and I guess they think you're going to go jump out the window or something. But anyway, he went on to tell me that he'd heard a lot of good things about this diet and lifestyle. He told me he knew people that had gotten well from this diet. And he told me that he even tried it himself. He didn't have cancer, but he tried using this diet. He thought it would help him, just with his general health. But he said, I couldn't stick with it. It takes a lot of work and time and energy. He says, but I found out one thing. There's a right way to do this diet and a wrong way to do it. He says, you got to do it 100% or you don't do it, because you people don't get the results unless you go out 100% and you give it your all. Well, I remember that, and that stuck like mud, because when he told me that, I said, well, I'm going to do it right. I'm going to set the example, and nobody's going to do anything better than what I'm going to do. And I got very excited because he confirmed everything I had learned, everything I was learning. And this was like a 3-day thing. And I mean, this was after that prayer. So my prayer was being answered. I mean, it really got answered, because I don't know any other reason for that other than it's just, fate and all that. But what's the difference? So he gave me that news, and before I knew it, and he also told me about 2 other books that I should read that would be very supportive, and I got those books. So I was, I had a bunch of ammunition now, and a lot of positive things to read, and that was very important for me. But before I knew it, it was time to do the chemotherapy, because I'd been in the hospital for almost 3 weeks recovering from the surgery. And they said, now's the time to do the chemo. Well, I got through it. It was hell, I'll tell you. It was terrible. And I got through that, and then I went home and started this macrobiotic diet as best I could. I was, trying to recover still from all the chemo and the hospital surgery. But I tried best I could to really dig in and read everything I could. But before I knew it, it was time to go back to the hospital to get more chemotherapy.
Yeah.
It's a long story. It's all in the book, and there's a lot of stuff in between, but we don't have time for that. But I go back in, I got the chemo, and I think they must have doubled or tripled it, because I've never been so sick in my life, Ryan. I tell you, I couldn't eat. I couldn't keep anything in my stomach. I was so sick. And the doctor comes in, and he says to me, he says, James, he says, I'm sorry, but your body's not responding very well to the chemotherapy. That's why you're so sick. He says, we had hoped that your body would accept it, but it's rejecting it. And he said, that's why, we don't feel that it's working that well for you. And I told him about an episode that actually that day, I believe, that I was laying there and I was so out of it when he came in. And I remember these nurses saying, who's been watching this man's temperature? It's way too high. This man could die. His temperature is way over the limit. We got to get his temperature down fast. So they went in, they started putting all these wet, icy, freezing towels on me to try to cool me down. And I remember that. I felt like I was dead almost. I had no energy. I was just lethargic, just like in a, half unconscious, and so I remember that. And I thought to myself, then I got to get out of here. They're going to kill me in here because of this treatment. It's going to, do me in. And because every night while I was in this hospital cancer ward, every night somebody nearly would die. They'd roll them down during the middle of the night. Yeah. They would die, and I would ask somebody, what happened? What happened to this person? And I would hear about it. And they would say, well, they died. They had cancer, and I'd say, well, what they really die of? And they'd say, well, they got pneumonia, or they had a kidney failure or something. And I'd say, well, really? Well, it made me realize real quick that, hey, this stuff is so toxic. It's poison you're putting in your body. And your immune system is already lowered because you have cancer in the first place. Now you're going to go put all this stuff back on top of it and destroy the immune system even further. And I don't want to be the next guy. And I'm afraid that's going to happen. So when the doctor said to me, he says, we don't know what else to do. He says, this is all we know to do. And I said, well, what would you do if it was your son or daughter? He said, well, I'd do the same thing. There's nothing else to do. And I said, well, what about a vitamin C and diet and things like that? He goes, he says, oh, that stuff works. He says, that's a waste of time. And I said, well, doctor, I could die in here from these treatments. He goes, well, he says, we're all going to die someday, just like that to me. And you know what I did? I raised up in that bed. I was laid up, kind of like that in the hospital bed, like kind of how they are. I raised up in that bed, and I looked awful, and I felt awful. I raised up in that bed, and I looked at him right in the face, and I said, listen here, you SOB. And I said it really loud the other way. And I said, if I could get out of this bed, I'd tear you apart like that. I mean, it just irritated me. It brought this anger out of me. And because he was taking my hope away. I had gotten very excited what I was doing. And I felt like, this guy was just going to just pull the rug out from under me with negativity. And so what did I do? I got up and I told him off, and he ran out that door, and I never saw that doctor again. Never, ever again. I only heard from him 2 years later. He wanted to know if I was still alive, because 2 nights after this episode, I snuck out of the hospital at 2 a.m. And I just decided to get my jeans on and sneak out and crawl out pretty much, and go out in the parking lot and get in my Jeep and drive out of that place and never look back, because I made up my mind at that moment that I was going to roll up my sleeves. I was going to go to war with that cancer. I was going to be the guy that was going to be a hero in his own life, the guy that was going to set the example. And if it didn't work for me, it wasn't because I didn't give 150%. And I would fight till the end. And I made up that mind, and I was going to use everything I could as far as the diet, the lifestyle, the vitamin C, anything else. I would be open to new things. And that's exactly what I did. And I mean, it's been 33 plus years later, still here walking around, and people can say what they want, but I guess you could look back at it and say it's probably one of the best things that ever happened to me in life. I couldn't realize it back at that time, because nobody wants to go through that kind of thing. But I realized that I had a different purpose in my life, and I was supposed to do different things and try to help as many people as I could.
33 years later, it sounds like it worked okay. That's great, James.
Yeah,
that's great. Could you back up a bit and maybe fill people in on exactly what the macrobiotic diet consists of? I think folks are probably familiar with the Gerson diet and some other things, but you hear about it from time to time, but just not quite as much detail on what it is.
Well, Macrobiotics was really bigger back in those days, and about in the 70s and 80s was pretty popular. And there's a lot of diets out there that they come and go, but it's still out there. But the macrobiotic diet is based on certain standard that you eat on a regular basis, and it consists of about, I would say, 50% whole grains, organic grains. And you hear a lot of don't eat grains, don't eat carbs, don't eat this and that. But this is whole grains, like organic brown rice and barley and millet and we didn't eat much wheat or anything like that, but it was 50% just whole grains. And then it was about 25% or more of vegetables. And most of the vegetables were either cruciferous vegetables, which are anti-cancer. They're good for fighting cancer. Yeah. Cruciferous vegetables, and we ate a lot of vegetables. And it was, 25% of our diet was vegetables. And we had, some of the alien vegetables like leeks and onions and all that were in the daily diet too. So they're anti-cancer. Garlic sometimes, but garlic wasn't a staple. But garlic is probably a very important thing that I've learned over the years. But the next thing that was important was 10% of the diet was beans for protein, like lentils, chickpeas, aduki beans, these small beans. They liked the smaller beans, the ones that they were high in protein but low in fat. So we ate about 10% beans every day, 10% soups, lots of vegetable soups. Every day we had soup, every meal. And miso soup was a staple. Like we ate this really high quality miso soup. You got to get the unpasteurized, the really good organic, of course, because miso soup, you know, is a real cancer fighter because it increases, you know, the good bacteria in our digestive tract. And that's 80% of our immune system right there, you know, just a healthy gut. And a lot of people don't realize that. But the other thing was we had the seaweed. 5% of it or so was seaweed every day, like, you know, just different kinds like wakame, arami, hijiki, which I don't recommend hijiki as much now. There's a lot of heavy metals in it and been reported, you know, found in it, but dulse. There's other ones that are good, but we ate that on a regular kombu. We ate that every day. There was seaweed in our food, so that's anti-cancer. So we had the soups, the beans, the vegetables, the seaweed, and the brown rice and the other grains, and we ate that on a regular basis. And occasionally we would have, like once a week, we would have fish soup, like a white meat fish soup. But very healing, very detoxifying, because when you take all this fiber, it acts like a broom. It starts to really clean out the system. I tell you what, I never met a constipated person, you know, a macrobiotic person. Nobody's constipated, I'll tell you what. And there's nobody running around that's not eliminating after each meal, I'll tell you, because it really does clean you out, and it does restore with all that fiber. It restores your intestinal flora, and it's so important. And there's so much cancer-fighting foods in that diet, and it just starts to open you up and starts to, once you get rid of a lot of these toxins that are the cause of the cancer in the first place, you start to feel excited. You feel like you're high on the food. So it was very, very important. And along with the diet, we also did different things. Like I did a lot of visualization. I'd visualize myself being well and visualize, being healthy throughout my body. And I also did a lot of meditation. And meditation, the way I did my meditation more than anything was I chewed my food. And in macrobiotics, they say, chew your food 50 times. Well, I thought, 50 times, I'll do it 180 times. I don't know where I got the 180, but I chewed my food. I'd sit there and count it. I'd do 1, 2, 3, but you have to keep it in the front of your mouth. You know, you can't, like people, how in the world could you chew food that much? So rice and vegetables. What you do is you chew it until it's liquefied. And it really increases the flavor of the foods. You start to realize that food is actually sweet, you know, the vegetables. You don't need sugar and all that, you know, because the macrobiotic diet gets the sugar out. It gets all that, and sugar is what cancer feeds off of also. So it's such a healing diet. Takes a lot of time and energy. Eventually, I ended up moving and working at the Macrobiotic Institute out in Western Massachusetts. And I was lucky enough to be able to walk away from what I was doing to make a living back then. And I ended up going and living there and for several years. So I had the support. I had this wonderful organic macrobiotic food every day. And I also had the support of like-minded people that didn't think I was crazy because I wasn't eating this, the regular American diet. And it also thought that I was a guy that, was it was this guy that I needed that support. I was a guy that fit in, and I just felt positive. There was no negativity. So that was a big help to me. And I realized then that, when you're around people, a lot of people, I met people from all around the world. A lot of these people would come there and they'd go home and they'd try to go back to their regular lifestyle and they wouldn't make it. You can't go back, whatever made you sick is the body's trying to get your attention. And, God, whatever, maybe is trying to teach you a lesson or try to get you to do what you're really supposed to do. But also a lot of people would be living with someone that was negative towards what they were doing, or their family was negative and thought they were crazy or something. And so the people that really did the best were the ones that could get away from that. And you need support. You can't have this doubt and fear and all this stuff. And
no, yeah, it's really tough when especially when it's in your own family and no one else is on board with what you're doing. I was actually just thinking it's really refreshing to be sitting here talking about different dietary strategies and meditation and positive visualization and all this stuff with a guy with a thick Southern accent sitting in front of a ranching cowboy painting. And it's usually, if I'm talking to two parents of a kid that's been diagnosed, it's usually the woman who wants to look into all the alternative natural stuff, and the man that just says, let's just do whatever the doctors say. So it's good to hear that wasn't the case for you, and it's good to hear that you were able to just get away from any negative influence whatsoever, because it's a big deal when you don't have any support.
And you gotta have an attitude, like I say all the time. I say this probably more than anything. You got to take the bull by the horns, as we say in Texas. And I think that, like, this picture back here gives me that strength that I need. It's like that cowboy kind of go for it in life. There's people go, well, he's a real cowboy. Not talking about me, but just in general. But that's about a guy that just goes out there and he lives life and he goes for it, and he, does what he has to do to get the job done. And that's kind of what I'm about. And I believe that you keep looking and searching for new things that you can do. It's kind of like if there's, 50 things that are anti-cancer, well, we want to get as many of those things in our lifestyle and our diet as we can. You don't want one or two. I talk to people sometimes, they go, what did you do? And they go, well, I changed my diet. Okay, fine. What else did you do? Well, but you want to see people say, I'm going to war with this. And I've got a wall full of weapons back here that I'm going all out. I'm going to beat this stuff. If I don't, then I'll feel good about myself, and I'll feel that, hey, I did my best. I did my very best. And that's the way you have to feel, at least at the beginning of the first few years, because, as you get doing better and all that, you don't have to be as strict. I'm not as strict as I used to be. I'm not really on a strict macrobiotic diet anymore, because I learned through some of my teachers that had a lot of wisdom, especially my teacher that was 106 when she passed away. And I learned from her that you can't be on this healing diet forever, that, you've got to branch out a little bit and be smart. But, your body needs more protein. And sometimes, it's hard for people to believe that. But you've got to get your cells and your glands, your endocrine system, your energy. Energy is a big part of it. You got to have the energy to heal, the energy to get back out there in life again. And I was eating this diet that was very healing, but I couldn't do anything. I couldn't go anywhere. I'd go, if I went on a trip, I'd have to cook my food in a motel room. And I would have dried food in a suitcase, and I'd be in there and I'd cover up the smoke detector, and I would get in there and I'd cook my food, eat my brown rice, vegetables, and my occasionally noodles and broth and things like that. But I was not going to veer away from it. I 6 years of this, I went into, And I walked every day. I quit all that running. You know, the running I was talking about is, I feel it's so important that you exercise, some kind of exercise several days a week anyway. I'd like to try to do it every day, but walking, deep breathing, you know, just getting outside. And I mean, try not to walk, you know, down a busy street where you're breathing exhaust fumes, you know, the whole time. But I feel that, you know, your body needs to move, but you don't want to wear it out either. So these people out there running 60 miles a week, you know, why did I get sick? People go, well, why did you get sick? You were all this. Well, you know, I got sick, I believe, because of my emotional background, stress from all the death in the family. But I was also exposed to a lot of chemicals. I had gas stations. For 10 years, I was exposed to petrochemical fumes. We had full service. I was out there doing this all day long, you know, putting in and breathing those fumes. I used to like the smell of gasoline. And I also was a pipe fitter for 7 years or so with PVC glues. So I'm sitting there breathing this, sitting there, you know, this stuff, just breathing that. And, you know, I was out in the sun when I was young. I worked construction, and I was out in the sun a lot. So I don't think it's just the sun. People go, melanoma is caused from the sun. I believe it's caused from the toxicity levels, and I believe it's ultimately from the immune system. Like maybe skin cancer, regular skin cancers from the sun, but you know, it's really the melanoma is an immune issue. And I learned that at the beginning. I didn't know. I just was eating this diet. But as I went along, I learned about many things, including parasites, intestinal parasites.
Yeah, that was a big, you had a big parasite cleansing too along the way, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I learned about that. I went to a seminar that was a friend of mine took me to a seminars about parasites, and there was a lady there that I know very well today because we ended up together and have spent all these years together. But she was Ann Louise Gittleman, and Ann Louise was teaching this seminar on parasites, intestinal parasites. And my friend took me to this, and he says, I think this would be very helpful for you, because I was starting to look for new things. This was after several years. I was doing really well on the macrobiotic lifestyle and, you know, everything. And I was feeling great and all that. But, and all that vitamin C, my gosh, I was like, I'm surprised I didn't turn into vitamin C. But
I'm sorry, I forget. Were you were doing intravenous vitamin C or just high dose oral?
I was doing high dose oral, and you hear a lot about the IV vitamin C, but I didn't do that. And a lot of people say, well, you don't absorb enough. Well, you know, over 30 years of vitamin C, I think I've absorbed a lot over the years, and I still take a lot, but I did that. But I took over 20,000 milligrams a day back then, and ate this clean diet. But then when I learned about the parasites, I went to this lecture. I go up to her after the lecture, and I found it very interesting because she was talking about people that had cancer and all this. And I asked her, I said, do you think I might have parasites because I've had cancer? And she looks at me and she says, well, yes, I think you have parasites. And I said, well, how do you know? She goes, well, you know, I've had a lot of clients over the year, and you just have that parasitic look. And I went, oh my gosh, you know, I must look terrible. So she said, if you don't believe me, you know, I mean, you should get checked out by a real expert. And there's a guy in New York City, and he's world renowned, and he is the guy you should go to, because if you had to go to somebody, he's the guy. Well, she said, you know what? I'd even be glad to go with you. I would ride along with you if you're going to go, because I'd like to meet this guy. You know, I've heard so many good things about him. So I got excited. I said, hey, I'm going to do this. So I took her up on it, and we went to New York. I was living in Massachusetts, and went down to New York and saw this doctor. And he says to me, he says, let's check you out. And he checks me out. And he was a Colombian doctor, so they're used to seeing all kinds of things. And back then, and I mean, our doctors should be on top of this more than they are. I mean, in this country, they don't even think it's a big issue, and most of them, they don't learn much about this in school. And of course, when you have an animal, the first thing the vet does is checks for worms.
Yeah,
that's the first thing. Why? Because that's the biggest issue that affects an animal's immune system and their health, overall health. So anyway, I get this doctor checks me out. He finds that I have worms, and he finds I have amoeba, and he finds out I have amoeba histolytica, and he finds out I had giardia.
How did he go about diagnosing all of that? Was it just stool samples, or?
No, what he did was he did a tissue swab sample. So they get you on a table, and they have this swab. They go up your rear, and they get this sample, and then they put it under the microscope on a slide. He had one of these teaching microscopes where he's on one end, I'm on the other end, and I'm sitting there, and he's showing me everything under there, and he's saying, see this right here, this is amoeba, or this is giardia, or this is ascaris. So he found all those in me, and he said to me, he says, my friend, you're loaded. He says, you were loaded with parasites. And I thought right then, oh my God, you felt all of a sudden you feel stuff crawling in you. But he said to me right then, I never forget it. He says, it's funny. I've never seen a case of cancer or a case of AIDS that didn't have some kind of parasitic involvement. He said that to me. He says, not ever in my whole career have I ever seen a person that came in here that had cancer that didn't have parasites. So it got my attention, and he put me on these herbs. And long story short, I ended up doing a different herb that Ann Louise recommended, because the ones he recommended, I didn't feel good on them. But he said that drugs don't work very well for this parasite. He could give me drugs, but he said that the herbs work so much better. So I was on these herbs for 3 months, and I can't tell you what I ended up seeing coming out of me, because the microscopic, the amoeba and the giardia are microscopic. You don't see anything with that, but the other worms, I mean, you almost think you have, spaghetti in you or something. It's terrible, and it started to come out, But after that, I started to think about all these other people that I knew that had cancer. And I said to myself right then, I said, I gotta do something. I don't want to help people with this. This is a problem. What can I do? I got to get myself cleaned up and then help others. So once I did, I started to look at ways of learning more about this parasite thing. And eventually I started a business that we actually sold parasite products and worked with people. But I think it's so important, if a person has cancer, that a lot of people say, well, I'll rule it out. But I just think that they probably most likely have parasites, and it wouldn't probably be too bad of an idea to consider some kind of an herbal cleanse, because if that's there, like the doctor told me, he says, parasites are one of the most immunosuppressive things you can have in your body. And he says to me, you got to get those out if you're going to have a strong immune system. And I was doing pretty well, and I'm sure all that diet and everything was helping me. But once I got the parasites out of me back then, I started to gain weight, because I was really thin. I couldn't gain weight. And I lost, when I was with the cancer, I ended up down to 120 pounds from 175 to 120. And, that was skin and bones there for a while. But once I started to getting better, my weight came on back up to, 145 pounds or so. So I knew I was, was getting better after that. But once I got the parasites out, I mean, I actually, my weight came on back up to almost where it was before. It's interesting.
Yeah. What was the herb that Ann Louise had recommended?
Well, they were herbs, like black walnut and wormwood and cloves and
Just some sort of formulation that was
yeah,
available back
yeah,
then.
and back then they were really good formulas. And I have a business now. We still have the parasite formulas, but they have a combination. The ones that we use now are it's like a tincture, and then there's capsules, herbal capsules. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch. And we've been using these formulas for over 25 years. And that's just part of our business. But I always felt that that's how I started the business I have now, because I felt like this is getting to the root of a lot of the health problems. You want to get to the root first and then rebuild. Once you detoxify, now you can rebuild, and then you can maintain, because you're not absorbing. Now people take all this stuff and they got parasites, or they're eating this fancy diet, spending all this money on all this other stuff. And I think they'll say that's not new news, but a lot of people don't even talk about it. They've got the magic bullet, but they're not really getting to the root of a lot of these issues. And, your digestive tract, again, is 80%. Your digestive health can be up to 80% of your immune system. So why not make sure that you've got a clean, healthy intestinal tract and system. And also you want to rebuild your intestinal flora, and keep it there. Keep the yeast and fungus out of your body, because that's part of it. When you have parasites, and usually you have yeast, fungus, low immune system, they thrive, the parasites thrive, and then people are eating sugar and they thrive on sugar, just like cancer. Some people even say, you get rid of the parasites, you get rid of the cancer. I don't know. But I'm going to be interviewing a guy here soon that you might have heard of him, but he's the guy that cured himself of cancer, or says he did, with dog worming medicine. And he's in the kind of all over the internet now, and I believe it, because he has proof. I mean, they had all cancer everywhere, and now they can't find anything. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. I don't think that there's there's not that.
Yeah.
Everyone's cause of cancer wasn't the same thing. There's a lot of different things that can cause those cells to go out of control. But I mean, that's kind of the approach, or the mindset we always had, is let's just let's just figure out everything that could possibly have caused this, or just be contributing to it, one or the other.
Yeah.
And let's just knock them all out.
Don't do one or two things. Let's do it all. It's everything we can. You can't do everything. But, there's other things you can do out there. I mean, there's, I think vitamin C is a huge deal. There's been a lot of positive things done with enzymes, with pancreatic enzymes. And there's people, I talk to people all the time that have had pancreatic cancer, and they get well from taking huge amounts of enzymes, vitamin C, change their diet. There's a lot of different things, but it's amazing. When they were told to go home, you got 3 or 4 months left. And 12 years or more. I know one fella, he's fine, feels better than he's ever felt in his life. Well, it's like, if he would have believed what they told him, he wouldn't be here today to be talking about it.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good note to start to wrap up on. Is like you said in the very beginning, it's really up to you what kind of mindset and just overall attitude you're going to go into this thing with, and why not go into it with I am going to beat this, or if I don't, it's not going to be because I didn't try 150%. Exactly, because
Yeah, and I'm the person that believes that if you read up on people that have been successful, and they all do different things. It's not like there's one way, but 50% or more is believing in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And if you're doing something, or you're going to some doctor or practitioner that's telling you to do something, well, do you believe in it? Well, I don't know. I guess, he tells me to do this. I guess he knows what he's doing. Well, first of all, your life is in their hands, should be in our hands. And second of all, you don't really believe And not saying you can't get well still, but I believe it's so strong to believe because, the mind is so powerful. I believe it's half of it or more is having that belief and that positive belief. And anybody that tries to scare you or put the fear or negativity in you, just run out the door and run out, get away from them because this mind of ours, this brain of ours is can be the adversary. I'll tell you.
Very good. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said there. James Templeton, thanks for coming on. Do you let us know what the name of the parasite line you have out there is, and then two, tell everyone about the book and anywhere else, your website, Facebook, anything else you want to point everybody to.
Yeah, the parasite products are part of Uni Key Health Systems, UNIKEY Health, and it's the Parakey and Verma Plus are the products. And, I talk a little bit about it, and I think it's in the back of this book. I used to have cancer. There it is. And this book, you can get at Amazon. You can get it. I used to have cancer.com. We have a website. I also have a foundation, Templeton Wellness Foundation, and I interview people on there that have had late stage cancer, most of them, and they talk about the things that they did because like I said before, you want to inspire as many people as you can. People need to have that support, and if it'll work for them, why can't it work for you too? And then also I have a restaurant guide that I'm very excited about now, that it's the Templeton Wellness site that has the restaurant guide. It's the Templeton List. And that Templeton List that we're in the process of finishing it up. We've got almost 2,000 restaurants around the country, the healthiest, organic, farm to table. We rate them. We've been working on this for over a year, and you can find that on the Templeton Wellness site, restaurant guide. And I'm very excited about that. And but also, if they want to find out a little bit more, they can go to iusedtohavecancer.com, and there's 3 free downloads that they can get on there. And there's links to the booksellers, but it's the top 5 supplements that I recommend that I feel are very, very vital with anybody who has cancer. Also, there's 10 recipes that I enjoy on a regular basis that are very healthy foods. And then there's also kind of a record of the things I do on a regular basis. It's kind of a guide of the things I do in the morning, afternoon, at night. Kind of gives people a little support on the things that they need to kind of maybe model their self after, especially for prevention. I don't ever say that what I do is going to cure anybody from anything. It's all or any of that kind of thing. It's all about, staying healthy. Prevention is the key. No matter what you have, none of us want to have cancer. 1 out of 2 of us nearly are going to have cancer. And you just want to prevent it. So why not just be on a good preventive diet in the first place, then wait around till it happens and destroys your life like it almost did to me.
Sounds like a good idea that I couldn't argue with, and I don't think many people listening to the show would either. James Templeton, thank you so much for coming on the Anti-Cancer Revolution.
Ryan, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and good luck with everything. Thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah, right back at you.
Thank you.
There you go. I love interviewing doctors and geeking out on the details, but I also really, really love these talks with folks that have been through it themselves and come out the other side with a great story to tell. And I certainly think James has provided us with just that. Like I said in the beginning, considering all the stuff you hear about in terms of what you could do to reverse cancer, refreshingly simple protocol that ended up being the winning ticket for James. Vitamin C, addressing parasites, and a rock-solid mindset that he was going to beat this thing. And he talked a lot about that mindset in the interview, but I just want to underscore it one more time. That can't be something that you just sort of say, yeah, I've got a good mindset. That state of mind needs to be viewed as a crucial centerpiece to anything else you're doing. It's not just that you perform better in all the activities that will help. There is so much amazing science showing that state of mind really produces massive biological changes one way or the other. So you've got to spend a lot of time and pay a lot of attention to make sure you're indeed in the right state. Ever thought about those two terms, by the way? Spending time and paying attention. It's true money can't buy health, but those two things can. They're two of your most valuable resources, and you've got to use them wisely to direct the outcome you want. That, and don't forget about the classics. It can be easy to say, yeah, vitamin C, but what's new? The reason you've heard so much about vitamin C is that it's really good stuff and it helps a lot of people and has a lot of solid research around it. Same thing with getting rid of parasites and going all out on a healing diet for that matter. Don't forget that. That about does it for me. I am Ryan Sternagel of the Stern Method, which is my family's take on healing. You've been listening to the Anti-Cancer Revolution. And if you are going through cancer, get right in your mind and just keep going. God bless, Godspeed, and we'll see you on the next one.